The year is 1916. Outside, Petrograd groans beneath the weight of war, famine, and the slow, sick collapse of the Russian Empire. Inside a lavish palace, a single man is dying again. His face is flushed, poisoned wine glistening on his lips. A slice of cake laced with cyanide sits half-eaten on the plate before him. He's been shot. Twice. Once in the chest, once later in the head. And yet, as the frost creeps across the windows and silence settles over the city, the man begins to move again, crawling across the polished floor, leaving a trail of blood and disbelief in his wake. This was the death of Grigory Rasputin, or rather, one of his deaths. Because if we believe the accounts, the man died not once, but 3 times that night, and each time he came back. But what if the most famous death in Russian history never happened the way we've been told? What if the truth of Rasputin's murder was even stranger, even darker than the myth? Behind the legends of poison, bullets, and an icy river lies a tale of obsession, royal fear, and political theater, scripted not by fate, but by those desperate to bury their sins beneath a myth. Because Rasputin wasn't just a mystic, he was a mirror, reflecting the slow implosion of a doomed empire. And his murder wasn't simply an execution, it was a ritual sacrifice meant to cleanse the rot from a royal house that no longer ruled, but clung. Before we uncover what truly happened that freezing December night, let's ask the question no one dared answer for a century. Why did Rasputin have to die so many times? If you enjoy exploring the secrets history tried to bury, the myths that hide real motives, and the dark theater of collapsing powers, consider liking this video and joining our community of curious minds. Share your thoughts in the comments. Was Rasputin a healer, a charlatan, or something far more dangerous? By the winter of 1916, Grigory Rasputin was not a man. He was a rumor, a shadow in the imperial corridors, a whisper behind every scandal. Some claimed he healed the Tsarevich with divine power. Others accused him of seducing the Tsarina. Still others called him the Antichrist, the peasant who'd hexed the Romanovs and bent them to his will, but none of them could ignore him. Born in a dirt village in Siberia, Rasputin arrived in St. Petersburg as an unwashed enigma. He wore peasant robes, smelled of sweat and incense, and claimed visions of the Virgin Mary. And yet, within months, he had inserted himself into the most powerful family in Russia. Tsarina Alexandra saw him as a divine gift, her last hope. Her son Alexei, heir to the Romanov throne, suffered from hemophilia. A single cut could mean death. Doctors failed, blood flowed, but when Rasputin whispered prayers over the boy, the bleeding stopped. To the desperate Tsarina, this was a miracle. To everyone else in the court, it was witchcraft. The Russian nobility, drowning in paranoia and loathing, feared that Rasputin was more than a healer. He was seen as a manipulator, a puppet master, even a German agent. His influence over Alexandra, especially after Nicholas left for the front, became intolerable. Private letters between courtiers show the level of hysteria. In one note recovered from the Yusupov archives, a noblewoman writes, "The holy devil sits beside her bed. His fingers twitch in her dreams. Russia is ruled by a starets and a woman who weeps." This wasn't just court gossip, it was psychological breakdown, metastasizing at the top of a crumbling empire. And so, a plot was hatched. Led by Prince Felix Yusupov, a decadent aristocrat with a flair for the theatrical, and supported by Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich and right-wing politician Vladimir Purishkevich, the plan was simple: kill Rasputin, save Russia. But what they wanted wasn't just his death. They wanted his undoing. His mythical aura had to be shattered. He had to die messily, humiliatingly, so no one could believe in him again. The chosen night, December 16th, 1916. The place? Yusupov Palace, in the basement. According to Yusupov's memoirs, written years later with the care of a man desperate to immortalize his role, the conspirators laced Rasputin's wine and cakes with cyanide. They expected him to choke, to collapse within minutes. But Rasputin didn't. Instead, he smiled, ate, drank more. His eyes twitched, his pupils dilated, but he remained standing. According to the embellished testimony, Felix began to panic. Then came the first gunshot. Rasputin dropped, but hours later, he rose again. Purishkevich fired more shots. The body twitched. There were conflicting reports of a final shot to the forehead, of Rasputin's body thrashing in a final seizure. Still, it wasn't enough. They wrapped his body in a carpet and threw it into the icy Neva River. Later reports claimed his arms were found above his head, suggesting he tried to claw his way out of the ice. Here lies the myth, the man who wouldn't die. But behind this myth is something more unsettling, because the autopsy, conducted in secret, revealed no poison in his stomach. The head wound, disputed, and cause of death, likely drowning. So what really happened in that basement? Yusupov's version of events, the poisoned cakes, the miraculous survival, the multiple shootings, reads like a gothic novella, and maybe that's exactly what it was, fiction posing as confession, because here's where the narrative starts to crack. First, the poison. Yusupov claimed the cakes and wine were saturated with cyanide, but the post-mortem, conducted under extreme secrecy, found no trace of poison in Rasputin's stomach. In fact, Rasputin showed no symptoms of cyanide poisoning at all. No vomiting, no convulsions. A forensic impossibility. Second, the timing. Multiple witnesses, including guards and servants, reported hearing gunshots at intervals far too spaced to match the frenzied murder scene Yusupov described. Some placed the first shot hours before the body was dumped in the river, suggesting not a botched assassination, but a prolonged, staged ordeal. And then there was the condition of the body. When it was recovered from the river days later, Rasputin's corpse bore signs of struggle. His hands were scratched and frozen. Water was found in his lungs, meaning he was still alive when he hit the water. But perhaps the strangest wound was the one never explained, a precise bullet hole in the center of the forehead, execution style. Neither Yusupov nor Purishkevich ever admitted to firing that shot. So who did? The answer may lie not in the basement of Yusupov Palace, but in the halls of British intelligence. The British Secret Intelligence Service had boots on the ground in Petrograd throughout the war. Their chief liaison, Captain Oswald Rayner, was a fluent Russian speaker, a close friend of Yusupov from their Oxford days, and according to declassified records, present in the city on the night of the murder. Officially, Rayner was there to assist the Tsarist regime in fighting German influence. Unofficially, he and other British agents feared Rasputin's sway over the Tsarina was pushing Russia closer to a separate peace with Germany, which would have devastated the Allied war effort. If Russia left the war early, it would free up dozens of German divisions to redeploy to the Western Front. From a British strategic perspective, Rasputin's survival posed an existential threat. Private letters uncovered decades later show Rayner writing to his superiors shortly after Rasputin's death. "Dear mother, the beast is gone. Thank God. The river never gave up a more curious corpse." That's not the voice of a bystander, that's the voice of a man who believed he had done his duty. Some historians now believe it was Rayner himself who fired the final shot, the clean execution-style bullet to the forehead, when Yusupov and his circle hesitated, a professional's intervention to end a farcical amateur attempt. The palace murder thus transforms from a drunken aristocratic fiasco into a state-sanctioned assassination, coordinated or at least sanctioned by Allied intelligence. This version reframes Rasputin not as a mystical survivor of death, but as the last victim of wartime espionage, a peasant turned political liability, liquidated for the safety of Europe's trenches. But this too is only a layer of the truth. Because Rasputin's power was never just political, it was psychological. To understand why Rasputin had to die, we have to understand what he represented. Russia in 1916 was bleeding from every pore. The Tsar was absent, commanding a failing army from the front. The Tsarina was isolated, derided as a German sympathizer. Revolution stirred in the factories, among the starving and disillusioned, and Rasputin somehow was at the center of it all. He was not a strategist, he held no official title, but his presence haunted the empire like a fever dream. He became the symptom of the rot inside the Romanov system. His greasy hair, his peasant drawl, his rumored sexual appetites. He was everything the Russian nobility hated and feared. The underclass elevated, the spiritual replacing the rational, the irrationality of monarchy laid bare. Palace records reveal that Rasputin's name appeared in over 24 official memos in 1916, most of them begging the Tsar to remove him, but Nicholas refused. Alexandra refused. Because to them, Rasputin was not just a man, he was faith incarnate, the only link to divine mercy, to hope for their son. In a strange way, Rasputin had become the real monarch, not in title, but in influence. He spoke and generals were reassigned. He warned and ministers fell. That more than any bullet or poison made him dangerous. So the nobles, the officers, the foreign agents, they didn't just kill a man. They killed a symbol. They tried to destroy the hallucination that had infected the Russian crown. But symbols don't die easily. And what followed wasn't salvation. It was collapse. When Rasputin's frozen corpse was pulled from the Neva, his killers expected relief. Instead, they found hysteria. The Tsarina fell into a manic grief. According to personal diaries from palace staff, Alexandra spent days locked in her chambers, clutching Rasputin's blood-stained boots, insisting he would return. She ordered statues erected, a chapel built on the site of his murder. She claimed to hear his voice in her sleep, and Nicholas, ever the weak reed in the winds of destiny, did nothing. Worse, news of the murder spread like oil on fire. Rasputin was gone, but the myth only grew. In peasant villages, they said he was martyred. Among the radicals, he was a symbol of the corruption at the heart of the monarchy. Among the nobility, his death solved nothing. The Tsarina remained isolated, delusional, her reputation in tatters. 1 month after Rasputin's assassination, revolution began to rip through Petrograd. Bread riots turned to worker strikes. The army mutinied, and in March 1917, just 3 months after the beast was slain, Tsar Nicholas abdicated. The Romanov dynasty collapsed like a house eaten from the inside. Some whispered that Rasputin had prophesied it all, that he wrote in one of his final letters, "If I am killed by common men, Russia will endure, but if I am killed by nobles, the dynasty will fall, and none of your children will survive." The note was real, handwritten, confirmed by palace records, found among Alexandra's personal belongings after her arrest, and as prophecy, it was chillingly accurate. Within 2 years, the entire royal family was dead, executed by the Bolsheviks in a dark cellar in Yekaterinburg. Alexandra, her daughters, her son Alexei, the child Rasputin was said to have protected, all of them erased. The nobles who killed him? Exiled, forgotten, or like Yusupov, reduced to selling trinkets and autographs in the cafes of Paris, living in a strange half-exile, repeating the story of the murder again and again, as if trying to convince himself it had mattered. There's a strange kind of justice in Rasputin's story, not moral justice, but narrative justice. He was called a demon, a sex addict, a false prophet, but in the end, it was not Rasputin who doomed the Romanovs. It was their inability to live without him. He was their addiction, their crutch, their scapegoat, and when they lost him, they had nothing left to hide behind. In this sense, Rasputin was less a villain and more a mirror. His debauchery was their debauchery. His irrational mysticism reflected their crumbling grasp on reality. His presence, in a way, was the most honest thing in the palace. And when the mirror was shattered, they found themselves exposed, naked to the revolution, to the rage of a people who no longer believed in crowns or saints. That's the part of the story that lingers, the part history struggles to reconcile, because Rasputin's death didn't save Russia, it revealed it. And for all the efforts to kill him, by poison, by bullets, by ice, what truly killed Rasputin was fear. The fear of a dying elite that could no longer understand the world around them. The fear of faith without reason, of power without control, of consequences long denied. He wasn't just a mystic, he was an omen. More than a century later, Rasputin remains a specter in Russian memory. His name is shorthand for manipulation, decadence, the fall of empires. His image, wild eyes, tangled beard, still haunts paintings, novels, conspiracy theories. But maybe the reason Rasputin refuses to die isn't mysticism. It's because he was never just a man. He was a story, a myth forged in real time by desperate men trying to make sense of a world slipping from their grip. His killers made sure his body was broken, but in doing so, they made him immortal. In the end, the real mystery of Rasputin isn't how he died. It's why we still need him, why we cling to the idea that one man could embody a nation's collapse, could explain the chaos, could take the blame. Rasputin was a symptom, a symbol, a scapegoat, but above all, he was a warning. That when power loses its mind and the rulers of a nation surrender to their fantasies, it doesn't take poison to kill an empire. Sometimes all it takes is a mirror.